Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's A Better Normal. If you just want to go ahead and put where you're watching from in the chat. Seems like everybody's coming from all over already. Maine, Nebraska, Texas. Canada.
We're international.
Indiana, New York. I'll just give everybody a minute to get logged on. Lots of Californias. Oh, Hawaii. All right, my name is Jenna Quinn, and I'm the Health Communication Coordinator for ACES Connection, and I'm just here to facilitate the meeting today. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and then I can go ahead and unmute you if we're ready to call on you. And I'll pass it over to Gail.
Thank you, Jenna. Hi, everybody. It's great to see so many folks here. I'm actually really excited about this A Better Normal. Because I think it's something that we don't talk enough about and is so important in the work that we do. And we actually just had a staff call this morning. Jenna and I were on a staff call this morning, and we were just talking about culture and about our organizational culture and how important in the work that we do that we keep thinking about that culture that we're trying to create in our organization. So that's what our Better Normal is going to be today. I'll introduce Andi and Lori in a second. And what we're going to do today is we're going to actually hear from them, and then we're going to do little breakout sessions for a few minutes where we can actually, they're going to have us do an exercise around culture. So that I'm looking forward to that. And then we'll come back together and have a discussion. So Andi Fetzner and Lori Chelius are both from Origins. Origins is training and consulting. They help educators, healthcare professionals, social service workers, and other leaders integrate a trauma-informed approach into their work so they can build more resilient organizations and communities. And I've known Lori and Andi, they're longtime ACES Connection champions and just friends and colleagues. So I'm really excited to have them join us today to talk about this important concept. And I just, when I actually was texting with Lori about a week ago, we had already been planning this. And I don't know if you folks know about this book, but I encourage you to read it if you don't. And Jenna, maybe you can put a link in it. It's called My Grandmother's Hands. And I'm really enjoying it. It's a powerful book. And chapter 19 is all about culture. So I communicated with Lori, I wanted to read a little bit from chapter 19. So change culture and you change lives. You can also change the course of history. Many well-meaning social activists overlook this essential fact. They focus relentlessly on strategy, but strategy means nothing to our bodies and our lizard brains. And that's, we know what the lizard brain is, right? Those of us that know about trauma. When strategy competes with culture, culture wins every time. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Andi and Lori.
Great, thank you so much, Gail. Thank you, Jenna, for leading us today. We're really grateful to be here talking about culture with all of you. I am going to share my screen so that we can get our presentation started. Let me make sure that, all right. So we're all set here. So today we'll actually be talking about some practical tools for building a trauma-informed culture. I'm Andi Fetzner. I'm a partner. I'm a psychologist here at Origins. I came into this work about 10 years ago after learning about the ACE study and learning about the whole trauma-informed thing. And the thing that really caught my eye was that trauma-informed allows us to get into the root cause and solve some of the root cause issues. And I think culture is a big part of that. You know, when we get to the culture, it's when we get to the root cause of solving problems. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'll hand it off to Lori.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lori Chelius. I'm one of the co-founders of Origins along with Andi. And I just wanted to share a quote. Andi and I'd like to talk about root causes. There's a quote that actually got me into this work from Desmond Tutu, that there comes a point where we need to just stop pulling people out of the water. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. And that is sort of, for me, the quote that led me to the work that Andi and I are doing at Origins. And so the root cause, language really resonates with me. But just wanted to thank Gail and Jenna and ACES Connection for bringing together this conversation today, because I think so much of, and we're all here because we know that trauma-informed is not about a checklist of activities. We know that it's deeply rooted in culture. There's that saying that it's trauma-informed is not what you do, but who you are. And we also know that as important as that conversation is, it can feel really daunting at times. The practices that underlie culture are often deeply rooted for years, for even generations. And when someone says we need to change our culture, that can feel really daunting. So what we're hoping to do today is sort of break that down a little bit and give some practical tools for thinking about how you might want to think about and be intentional about building the culture in whatever your setting is. As Gail mentioned, we're going to be doing some breakouts and activities. So we would love to hear from you guys and participate and hear your thoughts throughout today's conversation. So with that, I want to start by sharing a story. I am a big podcast fan, and I think I've gotten Andi hooked on podcasts. And so whenever she listens to one that she thinks I might like, she shares it with me. And so a few weeks ago, she shared a podcast with me from TED Radio Hour, which is a compilation of different TED Talks. But the story is from Valerie Kondos Field, who was the head coach of the UCLA women's gymnastic team for 29 years. For anyone interested, the talk is entitled "Why Winning Doesn't Always Equal Success." And when she told me about it, it really resonated with me because one of the hats I wear is as a youth soccer coach. So in her talk, she described about how when she first started as a coach, she had a mentality that was just, her job was to figure out how to win. And that was it. That was her job. In her own words, she described some of the tactics and the language she used that were, relentless, tough-minded, sort of bullyish, unsympathetic, and even sometimes mean. For anyone who's played sports, you probably know this type of coach. You may have even had a coach or two like this in your career. I definitely have had experienced that myself. But what we really want to focus on is what was for her a big transformation. She was going about this style of coaching, and it wasn't working very well for her or players. And so her team sat her down and talked to her and about what they wanted from her. They wanted to be motivated. They didn't want to be bullied. They wanted to be lifted up. They wanted to be supported. And that for her was this moment of transformation where she fundamentally shifted her entire approach to coaching. She defined a coaching philosophy, which was to develop champions in life through sport. And she describes how trust was just foundational to that approach. And she built it through patience, respectful honesty, and accountability. And she knew if she did this well, it would translate to wins, right? It did. She led her team to 7 national championships over the course of her tenure. And whatever your setting is, whether it's sports or organizations, you know this. You know when you have that chemistry that exists in that group, it's magical. And the sum is absolutely bigger than the sum of its parts. So that foundation she led was also sort of meaningful in so many different ways. She described how one of her athletes came to her, and with that trust that had been built, came to her and shared how Larry Nassar, the former USA gymnastics team doctor, had sexually abused her. And she had shared that with her coach for the first time and talked about how trust was really so much a part of the ability to disclose what had happened to her. So what does this all have to do with culture, right? So much of what she did was focused on culture building. She talks about how the earlier version of herself knew nothing about how to develop a team culture. So one definition of culture that we like to use is a set of shared attitudes, values, goals, or practices that characterize an institution or organization. And the key thing is here, all organizations, all departments, all families, all communities, they have a culture. The question is whether it's been created intentionally or not. And so what we want to talk about today is how you can really be intentional about some of the values that underlie your culture. Because think back to what she did. So much of what building culture is being explicit, putting into words the things that are important, the practices, the values, and being explicit about them and being intentional about them. So she developed a coaching philosophy. Remember that developing champions for life, and the values that underlie it. Remember that patience, that respectful honesty, that accountability, all with the goal of building trust in this environment. So think back to the quote that Gail shared from My Grandmother's Hands. When strategy competes with culture, culture wins every time. I have a background in strategic planning, so I say that as somebody with that background, culture is going to win every time. That old saying from Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I've seen this firsthand as a coach, certainly as a player. When the kids trust the adults that it's okay to take risks, it's okay to make mistakes, they start to trust themselves more. These are all life skills. And again, it all brings us to that intangible magic where that whole is greater than the sum of its part. So that's what we want to work with you guys on, you all today, talking about the values that are in our different settings, and work through an exercise to think about how those values are either manifested or not manifested in your settings. And Andy's going to take us through that.
Andy, you're still on mute.
I thought I was going to go off without a hitch. So Lori did get me hooked on podcasts, and I'm grateful for that, because that story really speaks to how a culture can create safety, a culture can nurture trust, a culture can then allow for healing to happen and growth to happen. So as we think about the UCLA gymnastics team, we think about a culture that shifted from looking at winning as their value, winning as their priority, to looking at relationships and looking at connection, and kind of encouraging one another as a value within their culture. When Miss Val pivoted and she listened to the voices of the people on her team, which are essentially the people who she's serving in her role, she shifted the voice and the value to each player as a fellow human, and kind of broke down that hierarchy. And I'm sure we see that in many of our systems. So whether you're joining us from education, from healthcare, from just a community structure, criminal justice, we see this in so many of the communities and cultures that we serve in. So I'm going to encourage you to take a moment for this activity and just consider your values. They may be similar to the principles that you see here, the principles of a trauma-informed approach from SAMHSA. It might be something similar or different than this. An example of a value that we have at Origins is that relationships matter. And so in our interactions, we really try to prioritize connections, like with groups like ACES Connection and other groups that share our values. And what we'll do is we'll set you up in breakout rooms where you can think about this value. So it might be something underneath, like I said, one of the principles of a trauma-informed approach, or it might be something different. And think about ways that your culture in your setting either reflects that value, like we're doing a great job, I know relationships matter because ABC, or you know what, the relationships in these different ways in my culture of my setting is not reflected. I'm really looking more at outcomes. We're really prioritizing outcomes over people. So we'll offer you, what do we say, about 12 to 13 minutes, something like that, and getting into those small groups. And so you'll first identify your chosen value, identify the ways that your culture and your setting reflects that value, and then identify some ways that the culture in your setting might not reflect that value. And we will join back here. Anything you'd like to add, Lori?
No, just I know many of you have done breakout rooms, but just in case anyone hasn't, you will sort of get a link. Jenna's going to set that up. You'll join the group, and then you will be able to link back to the broader group when we're done. So.
Okay, everybody should be getting the invitation to join their breakout room now. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close all the breakout rooms now. Hi everyone, welcome back. Give people a few more seconds to get back in.
All of that.
I think everybody's back now.
Hey, welcome back. We're looking forward to hearing the wisdom that was shared in the groups. We're also looking forward to hearing about any surprises that you may have had in thinking about values in this way. So we'll just open up the floor to either in the group chat, or if you would like to unmute yourself, you can do that. And just share a little bit about, what you noticed in your groups, any similarities and differences, that type of thing.
I can get us started. This is Gail here. I can get us started. It was interesting, our group, we had very similar values. It was all about either connection or relationships or the importance of trust and transparency. And the challenges, we spent quite a bit of time talking about the challenges because of COVID and how difficult that our the value that is so important to us as an organization is hard to actually be able to do with everything virtual, when we're all virtual, and relationships are so important, and yet here we are not able to actually connect with each other in person. So I don't know if anybody else from the group wanted to say anything, but that was my take.
Great, thank you, Gail. I do see in the chat, it looks like relationships and connection is a big one, especially regarding COVID, having some hard times doing that. How do we connect in this new normal type situation that we're in? I also see that there's shared that our settings value hard work, giving back, and excellence, but that challenge, the challenge is to practice self-care and team care while doing so. So it's easy to provide service where we really encourage that, whether it's in a clinical setting or any type of service. Even if we're in a managerial role, we tell our employees, hey, take care of yourself, and remembering to model that and remembering to actually do that is not always consistent. Great point, absolutely.
We have any other brave souls who are willing to share on video what they talked about in their group?
Tracy, I can go ahead and unmute you.
We had a common thread in our group of 4 of there were kind of people first values. We're all service providers in some capacity, but the challenge that we saw were buy-in from and maybe shared understanding of what that actually looks like from the cult community, and then also the opportunity to agree upon or have some measures that would demonstrate that that value is being met, and trying to, especially when you are in the people business, kind of quantifying, or so this idea of sort of shared understanding about a value that might be looked differently from different perspectives, and then not sure everybody has that buy-in or that agreement on when you can celebrate a success, that you're meeting certain benchmarks.
Right, absolutely. I'm a part of an organization nationally that does some volunteer work, and we were talking last night on a call. I'm on a committee where our role is to evaluate all of the different projects that the organization does, and we were talking about how over time the measures have changed from year to year, and it's people service, so having more consistent measures that look at things from one year to the next while still being innovative and adaptable, and how do we mix that? I think identifying that as a need, Tracy, is a great point, and so bringing that to the forefront of conversations can be helpful. Thank you for sharing.
I'm wondering, Tracy mentioned sort of different, I think you mentioned part of it, Tracy, was different cultures. I wonder if anyone else experienced that, where either different departments within an organization or different groups within a community are operating with different cultures. Is that something that anyone else has experienced?
Seeing lots of head nodding. Anybody wants to raise their hand and share?
I see one that's pretty relevant, discussing valuing empowerment, choice, and voice, where the lack of trust, fear, and wanting to avoid further stress can be barriers to that. And I mean, I might be biased that I think this approach is the solution to everything, but I also work in a healthcare organization, and we've found that with the departments that we've started to actually put this conversation and have a shared language around, hey, I do not trust, or hey, I am feeling afraid, or hey, I'm feeling stressed, which that is one of the gifts of COVID. Now it really is all of us. Dr. Burke-Harris has been saying that for years, of course, but I think now more than ever, it is all of us. So just having that language can be really helpful to give voice and actually offer choice. Great point on that, group. Thank you.
I'm wondering too if anyone has gone through a process in their organization where are you describing what it is, or is it just been through a process to be intentional about that? And if so, if they'd be able to share what that process looked like for them.
Hi, I'm Maggie Carlson, and I am a retired teacher. I know of a process my son is going through as a teacher in a K-12 school, where they have supporting committees or groups with each other. That has been something like I've never experienced in education before. And what they do is they bring in their work, their lessons, maybe videos of them teaching, but not to show what they're doing well, but to show where they failed. So they're building a trust community around, I would like some ideas of how I could have done this better. And what it's been such an amazing experience for these people that they all can see that they're admitting that they have these challenges, but at the same time, then they're using each other as resources and have developed very trusting, deep relationships because they come at it from where I failed, how can I get better?
I love that.
The level of vulnerability. And I hear like a growth mindset, which is great to have in education anyways. There's vulnerability, and Lori and I like to say mistakes are okay. There's another TED Talk about that from Lori. Do you remember who it was? About mistakes are okay, mistakes are necessary.
It was the Astro Teller talking about how innovation doesn't happen if we don't accept that mistakes are, so creating the culture around accepting mistakes are part of mistakes are risky or just a key part of innovation. And if you don't have a culture that supports that, you're not going to innovate. So Astro Teller, he was from Google X, I think, which is some arm of Google or something.
Sarah Durbin had a comment about the process she's going through at work now, so I'm going to unmute her.
Great. Yeah, so I work for the North Dakota Department of Corrections Rehabilitation, and we just launched right before COVID hit our trauma responsive movement, right? Trying to get us all the way to trauma informed. So we're at the very beginning of that because things got delayed, as all correctional facilities got delayed as we focused on. We're doing really great. We have very few cases. But we're just getting started on it. So we have a resiliency committee that's partly trauma-informed, partly employee wellness. We're building an app, and we're building resources, and we're doing videos. And then we have a group that does big projects. And so we have the trauma-informed classrooms, and we have trauma-informed training. But the thing I'm most proud of, and the thing that I'm actually working, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm working on the presentation, building one of the presentations for it as we are going through this, is we have a key leader program. And what we're doing, so in the field of corrections, we're very, very vertically organized. And oftentimes things come down from the top down, right? In terms of like you do this and everybody kind of is supposed to follow underneath, which causes a lot of problems in having things stick around. And so instead what we're doing is we're starting with a group of 10, 2 at each facility, 2 in P&P or parole and probation. And we're training them in both on trauma-informed care and trauma-informed practices, and in metacognitive like stuff and in participant observation principles. and everybody's going back into their workspace and looking for small things that they can change. It might be like how meetings run, or just how contacts are done, or something small like that, things that are kind of those like small cultural changes, but also how to build peer support within their facility and that type of thing. And from there, this first group, once they go through the process, they're going to mentor 2 more people, and then from on and on until we can kind of get the building of it across. So we're starting kind of laterally rather than vertically.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that I see that Alex put a question for everyone, and I just kind of want to make the connection between this idea of, do you have to have buy-in from leadership in order to create a trauma-informed culture? And I think Sarah's answer kind of gives a description as to how it doesn't have to be so, but that it can also be so. I work in a huge, like I said, a huge healthcare agency. It's not huge, it's large, but it's, we have 16 clinics, and healthcare in general is vertically designed. And so what I found in my experience is, and this is true for other contracts that we've done with different agencies, that it's often a department that will start to kind of pilot, and then it will show the culture change, the outcomes, and then it can become contagious throughout the organization. And so I don't know, I want to hear what other folks have to say, but that was my 2 cents, and I think Sarah and Alex, that those are kind of connected there.
Alex, did you want to expand on your question at all?
Well, I think in my research of like how organizations can be trauma informed and like trauma responsive, it seems that there's a consensus that things should come from the top to bottom, which makes sense when you think of the power dynamics that exist between leadership and staff. And so I forget the name of the person who just shared about their son being a teacher and kind of creating these groups of support. And like, it seems that that's like a very, like, that's very good, and it's great. But can it reach all of the staff of the school, and therefore reach all of the children and the staff at the school who are like either experiencing trauma or secondary stress or whatever, without leadership buy-in? It seems that a lot of us on this call are wanting to see a culture shift in their organizations, or in general in organizations that they work with, but that I'm at a loss to think of like ways for that to change without leadership. I'd love for there to be tons of CEOs and COOs on this call telling us that they're looking for, you know, a change, a culture shift, and they're ready to do the work. But yeah, so that was my question. And someone gave an example, the person we just heard talk about, and that's great. I just wonder if it's going to have kind of like the reach that it should have.
And the sustainability piece, Alex, that's a great, I mean, you can do it in your classroom, you can do it in your family, but that doesn't mean that that is going to change our country. It's going to change one piece. And so, of course, on the grander scale, we want all the presidents and all the CEOs and all of the ones who make the policy to be adopting this approach, and knowing that, well, we want to hold hope for that. That's not always possible. I see a lot of great comments in the chat here from different folks talking about all different sectors, from healthcare to grassroots levels. One group is using collective impact approach and drawing on the water of systems change model that have been getting good leadership buy-in. Yeah, leadership is key, absolutely. And that's, and the cross-departmental leadership too. You can have the CEO, but if you don't have the chief medical officer and the finance folks understanding it, it can be really challenging.
I think Gabrielle just raised a good question. Are people not recognizing the need to become trauma informed, or are they just not wanting to put in the work to change existing systems?
I have a psychology answer for that.
It's hard. It's hard. It's messy. It takes a long time.
And our lids are flipped, right? So if we talk about we're surviving, think of like all of us right now and the number of things we have on the plate. So often being trauma informed, I mean, it could be the plate that holds everything and makes it so much better, but it's not always like that. So, you know, it feels like one more thing on top of the plate. And regardless of if it's something that's going to help make everything easier, when we're already feeling overwhelmed, one more thing seems like one more thing. When our budgets are strapped, when it requires that we ourselves ask questions about, am I doing this the right way? You know, we come from a culture that is very binary in that regard. So our culture at large is going to have to shift. But each of us has the opportunity to be a leader in this and to be a voice of, okay, I hear what you're saying. And also, you know, we're challenging deep-rooted values of folks, as somebody says in the chat, Tina says in the chat here. So much good conversation in the chat. I just want to like read it off. Did you want to add, Lori?
I just wanted to add one just comment or thought on that. This obviously big systemic, big change, you need sort of leadership buy-in and sort of buy-in throughout the organization. And then I think we've also seen a lot of people get stuck when those perfect circumstances don't exist, that to get completely stuck and paralyzed about where you can have an impact in a smaller setting that is sort of Andi described might be contagious. Of course, if we want sort of the top down and the bottoms up and everything in between, but sometimes that doesn't always happen. And I think one of the things is figuring out how we can figure out what the changes we can make in what setting we do have that can be meaningful, without getting so paralyzed about the bigness of all of this.
Don't let perfection get in the way of progress. I don't know who said that. It wasn't me. I didn't come up with it, but it's a great quote that I think applies to this circumstance. It keeps us moving. So in the interest of everyone's time, I love the chat that everyone's having. I'm hoping that folks are taking notes on the different models and specific interventions that are proving effective in different groups. Each of you, I want to bring us back to another quote. Each of you is a leader, no matter your status and no matter where you fall in that vertical build, and your own awareness and your own language and being able to talk about these topics, no matter if you're a parent or an educator, CEO, criminal justice, no matter what sector you're working in, with vulnerability and leadership, we all have the potential to lead this change. So that was a good quote to wrap up what we just talked about. So I think that's what we have to talk about today, Gail, and thank you all for participating. You bring so much wisdom, you know, that we're all people. So it was great to have this conversation.
So thank you, Andi and Lori. One, I want to say a couple of things. I've done a lot of it. Well, I've done a few of these Better Normals, and the depth and there's so many great chats, that so much was put into the chat that is really inspiring. So we will, I mean, Jenna, let's be sure we save the chat. And Andi and Lori, maybe you guys can write a story about that, like because I know you're planning to write a story, a summary of this discussion. But I think you're gonna want some of the chat stuff to do that. So we'll be sure to pass that on to you. And what I want to do now is just Andi and Lori, if this is, because this felt like just a tease, just a little bit of a, like, getting your feet wet in this. Do you guys want to talk some about if people want to learn more, or have you more involved in the work that they're doing? Do you want to say a couple words about that?
Sure, I can share, and I'll also put up our information so you can connect with us. Here we go. Yeah, there we go. So you can sign up for our newsletter on our website. We'd love to stay connected with you, and of course on social media. I can speak to a couple of the different courses that we offer. So as we've talked about, Lori and I work with organizations. Oftentimes it's a group, sometimes it's individuals who are wanting to integrate this approach into their setting, again, across sector, because the concepts are translatable into any setting. And the process itself is not necessarily linear, of course, right? It's messy, and that's the fun of it. But there are some great solid foundations that we hold and have found to be true, that are all founded in research and all founded in the science of this work, of course. We have a foundational course called The Basics, which is our intro to trauma-informed approach, which speaks to creating a shared language within an organization. We really encourage groups to participate in that. And, you know, oftentimes it's folks who just heard about the ACE study at a conference somewhere and they want to learn more. We had a woman who has been doing this work for years, and she hadn't thought of intergenerational and social and historical trauma. And the foundational concepts that we cover in the basics are ACEs and toxic stress, social and historical trauma, the body and the brain, so the physiology component, and then of course resilience, which is why we're all in this work. So the basics course, we have it a couple different ways. Right now, you can get it on demand. You can also get we're doing a live version of the basics starting on October 14th. It will be the first 2 weeks of our bigger program, because once you've taken the basics, you can move into more activities and more fun things that are similar to what we did today in our Resilience Champion program. So it's 6 modules on demand, and it starts out with looking at culture, of course, establishing a foundation, creating goals, creating an actual action plan, of course, looking at an assessment to see where folks are at. We have a cohort starting on that on September 4th. And then we have a live version that folks, you would just sign up on for the October 14th live version, and then take the basics and then continue on to the Resilience Champion program. That program includes the basics. So you can check out our newsletter. Just sign up for our newsletter and we'll send you a bunch of info about it coming up. But we really have enjoyed working with so we worked with a school, and one of the schools we worked with ended up being in the same class with a healthcare facility close by, and that they ended up partnering up and doing some work together, kind of the Paper Tigers model. And it's been really a great journey. We've worked with Native American communities, advocates, folks who are interested in policy around this, just so that they can get that foundational language. And, you know, we give examples and real life activities so that it can apply to whatever work you're doing.
Thank you, Andi. Lori, any last words?
No, thank you for having this conversation today, and, you know, really enjoyed hearing from folks. And, you know, our thing is, let's get started. I mean, there's so many, these topics are big, and they can feel overwhelming, and defining what those steps are to sort of sometimes get out of the starting gate or keep moving, and breaking that down to be able to do that. That's one of our biases.
Right.
we bring. So thank you so much for everyone's, for the conversation today. And we loved hearing from everyone.
Thank you.
So much
Yeah, I really loved that. There was so much. I mean, it just gives me hope, and that reading all the comments of all the amazing work that you are all doing out there. And I'm just going to put a little pitch in for ACES Connection. If you're doing work, because I think Tina, you were talking about in corrections, please, we want to know about that work. We want to share about that work. That's what we're here for at ACES Connection. So please reach out to me or to Jenna if you're not sure how to post a blog. But if you are and just hesitant to do it, please post those success stories or the challenges. That's what we are trying to do here at ACES Connection, is connect all of us to do the work, to do this amazing and important and a lot of times challenging work.
And Lori and I actually met at an ACES conference. We wrote a blog about it. So we plug ACES Connection all the time. If it weren't for ACES Connection, that's our origin story.
I love that. Mercedes, I just saw that we can't save the chat via phone. Jenna and I will figure out, because I'm not sure that we want to share the chat openly because people didn't give permission. But maybe Jenna, you know about that.
We can share the chat, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just, I can put my email address if people would like it, and you can just shoot me an email.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, and have a great rest of your week. Please stay safe and stay healthy. Take care of yourselves. That's the most important thing. Bye.
Hi, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here.